Thank you, James and Dean, for your warm welcome. My name is Kira, and I will be your MC today. I want to say a special thank you for those who were at Stanford yesterday and welcome everyone here today. We had a lot of fun at Stanford yesterday. We hosted speakers including YC CEO Michael Siebel, Tesla and SpaceX board member Steve Jurvetson, and I'm sure today will be a lot of fun as well. Before we begin, just a friendly reminder that we ask you to stay seated during this session in courtesy to our speakers, and if you have to move, please do so in between sessions. Without further ado, let's get started. Our first speaker is a respected scientist who holds many US and international patents. He is an entrepreneur who has created 5 companies. He's also a novelist. He has published several novels, and one of which was sold a movie to Paramount. Astro is the CEO at X, formerly known as Google X, the Moonshot factory at Google. Fun fact, he wears rollerblades at the office, and you will see him on rollerblades at all time meeting between office. He has actually crunched the numbers to prove that being on rollerblades versus walking in the office save on average 8 minutes of his time every single day. Now, please join me in welcoming Astro Teller.
Hi everyone, thank you all so much for being here, and special thank you to Astro for coming all the way up from Mountain View to join us.
My pleasure.
We are super excited to hear from you today, not just because of all the amazing work that X does, but also because of your amazing story of how you got here. So maybe we could start by you sharing a little bit of your story about how you became captain of Moonshots.
Well, I'll give you like the 90-second version and then you can tell me what you want to hear more about. But I did an undergrad at Stanford in computer science. I did a master's at Stanford. I was actually co-term, so I started it, my master's before I finished my undergrad, in symbolic and heuristic computation, which is sort of a mishmash of AI, cognitive science, neuroscience, a little bit of philosophy, logic. And then I went and I did a Ph.D. in artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon, and I wrote my first novel while I was there, so I had this kind of split coming out of there. I was considering becoming a novelist and decided not to because I didn't think I wanted to be stressed about whether people liked my books enough to pay for them. That just seemed like a tough life, which is different. I still want to write books, I just don't want to have to stress about whether people like them or not. I seriously considered becoming an academic, but the idea that I could see all the way down the corridor of my life till I was 70 years old with no kind of turns, I just sort of knew exactly what I would be doing, who I would be. I was very uncomfortable with that, so I decided not to do that one. And then I happened to have a very special working relationship with a couple of professors at Carnegie Mellon, so I convinced them to leave their various departments and start a business with me. And we ran a series of businesses together, and so I became a serial tech entrepreneur. And after a few of those, I was in the middle of trying to spin out a company from Stanford called ViewTool with a professor there named Sebastian Thrun, and just as we were in the middle of spinning it out, Google bought it before we'd even incorporated. So Sebastian got sucked in, his graduate students got sucked into Google, and I didn't. So we're like, oh shoot, that would have been fun to work together. So I went off and I started an AI-based hedge fund. It was my 4th company, I guess. And then the founders at Google became really keen on Sebastian and trying to get him to stay. They're like, hey, what about self-driving cars? And he said, nah, I think I'll go back to Stanford. And they said, what about self-driving cars and like a 21st century Bell Labs? And he said, okay, I'll stay for that. And they asked him if he wanted a co-founder, and so then he came and asked me. This was 2.5 years later, so I now had the AI-based hedge fund up and running in San Francisco. It took me about 6 months to hand that over to my CTO, make sure that there was enough money in the company that would be fine without me, and then I moved over and was the first mate to Sebastian at the beginning of what became Google X. About 2 years in, he really wanted to start a moonshot in education for a variety of reasons, that wasn't, Larry and Sergey didn't think that was right at X, so Sebastian left and started what was called Udacity, which probably many of you know, and so I was left kind of holding the bag 8 years ago now.
Thank you for sharing, especially all your way from aspiring potential novelist all the way to where you are today. And what would be really interesting to hear is, I think everyone has heard of moonshots and what that means, but maybe you could define for us what you see as a moonshot. What defines what a moonshot story is as opposed to any other tech company or startup?
You know, I think if you slice it thinly enough, the distinction may be a little bit blurry. There are, I believe, we could have a juicy fight here on stage. By and large, venture capitalists are sort of gambling, and that's cool, but the interest that we have at X is seeing if we can get into the card counting business instead. And so there's some things we could talk about if you're interested about what it would look like to card count. But part of taking a moonshot is being able to deliver on, you better be able to say what the problem is that you want to fix in the world. You have to say how you're going to try to solve that problem, and that people haven't tried to solve it that way before. And you have to say why you think you have a chance of actually getting started. The first of those three, being able to say what the huge problem is to cut off the sort of academic mentality that some people can come at it with. They're like, I got a frictionless surface, which is, that would be cool. I'm interested to see a frictionless surface, but it's not at all clear that you can do an important, valuable business with a frictionless surface. Like, go back and see what problem that solves first. You have to be able to name a science fiction sounding product or service that would fix the huge problem and satisfy us that people haven't tried before. Because I don't want to be in a smartness contest with everyone else, because we'll lose that contest. I don't want to be in a who can spend the most money contest, because even if Alphabet could win that contest, that's not the contest we should be in. I want to be in the we can be weirder than you, we can be more creative than you, we can be braver than you by going into these fields that are so far from what feels normal that no one else has gone exploring in those areas. That feels like maybe that's worth doing. And then the concern is, why do we think that going looking in that weird field is likely to work out? And that's that third part, which is help me understand some kind of aha from a technology perspective that gives us at least A, a chance that there's something in that field, and B, in a first thing we could test, such that if that test tells us, nope, nothing under that rock, we can throw it away. And if the answer is, hell, there's something cool under that rock, then we can look under that rock more.
And would love to hear a little bit more about some of the most exciting rocks that you've looked under, where you've then decided, well, this is weird and awesome.
Sure. I'll use three examples that are somewhat long in the tooth now because they'll be easier to understand. A decade ago, saying cars were going to drive themselves, that was not universally accepted. We were almost universally laughed at for suggesting that was going to happen in the next 30 years. And so fast forward a decade, there are lots of cars, our cars, in the Phoenix area giving people rides to work every day. And there are cars in Phoenix that have no customers in them, where there's not even a safety driver in the front seat. And I think there are now starting to be people who are actually getting rides, paying for the rides to work and to school, and there's nobody in the front seat. So 10 years in, it's starting to be real. That's an example. The self-flying vehicles for package delivery, when we said that drones solving the last mile problem for something that could fit inside a bread box, 7, 8 years ago, that was Taco Copter. That sounded ridiculous. And I think the world has moved from there to seeing that that might actually be a really important part of rethinking logistics. And part of what excites us about it is that we think it can facilitate a movement from an ownership-based society to an access-based society. Right now, the really big stuff, your bedroom, your car, you can rent out through something like Airbnb or Uber or Lyft. But every single person, who has a house in the area, or most people have an apartment, own a hammer. That's crazy. Like 10,000 of us could share one hammer between us. Why are we making 10,000 hammers and they're sitting around the whole time? So, but you won't wait an hour and you won't pay $10 for someone to bring you the hammer. But you wait 1 minute and pay $1 for the hammer to show up. How's that going to happen? I think drones doing delivery of something the size of a bread box really could change that.
Absolutely.
The stratospheric balloon project is another one. That was considered so ridiculous even by us when we started. We literally called it Loon to remind ourselves how unlikely it was that it worked out. But 8 years later, we now have a lot of stratospheric balloons over at least 3 continents and actually delivering service to people. It's pretty cool to see it working.
And those are all amazing projects to hear about, because all the things that we read about in the news is really where you work on day to day. So what helps you kind of think about these very long-term projects on a day-to-day basis in terms of exactly what we were chatting about earlier, in terms of creating urgency and having people push that forward in a timely manner, while at the same time feeling like that there is realistic, measurable work getting done?
Yeah, it's a trick. If you work at X, then I want you to understand that the project you're working on is unlikely to make it. And that's okay, because most things don't make it. The question is not, were you smart enough to pick the thing that's actually going to make it? Because nobody is. I mean, that's the gambling thing. 1 in 100 of us, maybe 1 in 1,000, happen to pick the right thing. But none of us can actually know what it is. So the entire trick, this is what card counting is how are we going to get you to be incredibly intellectually honest about whether your thing needs to be pivoted or just put 6 feet underground. And if you fight me on that, then you're not going to work out at X. But if you can embrace that process, I don't care that your thing doesn't work out. If you work through it thoughtfully, and then when it's appropriate, you end it, and then we start a new project, awesome. Like, we'll just play that game all day long. Now, in the early days, I don't want you to have equity in this thing, because that will cloud your judgment, right? Which is what leads entrepreneurs to sort of create all the smoke and mirrors that they create to try to get funding from people. I want the opposite of that between you and me. I want you to be honest, and I want you to feel it's in your best interest to be honest. So, how am I going to get you to feel like putting in the extra hours, being that extra piece, brave, and taking the right kinds of risks to drive the project either towards success or towards failure and a learning moment? Either of those is okay. And at least one of them is we point at the purpose. We say, look, we're working on the climate crisis. Should we work on that slow or should we work on that fast? And I think we could agree, like, there's some urgency there, let's work on that fast. There are other things where, even if it's some cool new computer chip that's, you know, going to change the world, and it doesn't feel quite so purpose-oriented, I can say, look, either this is going to work or it's not. If it's not, it's because it has some Achilles heel with the business model, with the technology as we've imagined it. Should we find that out in 3 months or in 3 years? If we find it out in 3 years, you will feel good for the next 3 years. Maybe even get some promotions, your salary might go up, but you will have wasted 3 years of your life. How much do you value your time? Your time on this earth is really precious. Are you sure you don't want to kill it in 3 months so we could get onto something that might actually change the world? And we don't know that it has an Achilles heel, but let's dig really hard, really fast, urgently to find the Achilles heel. And I think I can make you feel like, yeah, that's probably, as long as I can be in a place, as long as you trust me that X is a place that will reward you for doing that, you don't want to waste your life. You'll actually get in the swing of it.
And that is really the culture that you need to be able to build, that culture of transparency and trust in order for the right conversations to happen. And obviously, given just how many projects are happening at any one point in time, you must be everywhere. So how do you prioritize your time, and what do you spend most of your time on?
I prioritize, so I couldn't possibly do this all myself, and I actually mostly don't even give out my own ideas, especially about projects, because that would then send people a signal that we're trying to amplify my brain, and no brain, including mine, maybe particularly mine, is worth a huge number of people amplifying. We as a group I think can do extraordinary things, but that means trusting each other and listening to each other and having a real meritocracy where the best idea wins instead of my idea winning or the ideas of my direct reports. So one of the things that I can do is I can model that behavior and hope that other people start copying it. It's unfortunate because part of what I feel like I'm trying to teach is people thinking for themselves and being brave. And unfortunately, if I was trying to get you to be a slavish robot, you work at X, let's say, and it's all top-down command and control, then I could order you to be a slavish robot, and I could order you to make your people be slavish robots. Unfortunately, if I'm trying to get you to think for yourself and be weird and creative, and at least some of the time right, and show me that I'm wrong, I can't order you how to deal with your people. So some of the things that I'm trying to model propagate very imperfectly through X, but that's, I think, the cost of not having a command and control structure. So I joke, one of the things that I do is I say, I'm not the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike preventing the dam from breaking. I'm going around with a power drill, like drilling holes in the dike, because I don't think people realize we're not actually going to die if the dike breaks. We spend all of our time freaking out about how bad it will be if we fail, if something goes wrong. Every failure is just a learning opportunity, and I'm obsessed with winning, completely obsessed, more obsessed than anyone in this room, I promise you. I just have a very long time horizon on winning. And if you have a 20 or 30 year perspective on winning, then you can completely leave your ego aside today, this week, this month, and say, I don't care how wrong I am. I want to learn ferociously so I can win over 20 or 30 years. And so part of what I'm trying to do is teach people that the egg we get on our face in those learning moments, if you have a long time period over which to amortize that learning, it pays off so many times over.
And I think that's perfect advice, given that a lot of folks sitting in the audience today are students or young alumni, and some professionals. And I think this is a great point to ask you, if you were a student again, what some of the things that you might have done to better leverage your time, or any career advice that you would share with relatively younger audiences here today.
I have lots, I'll give you 2 or 3. So one of them is, there's so many things that come up at X, because we touch on almost every sort of technical aspect and almost every business aspect in the world. And so all these things that in my undergrad time at Stanford in particular, I think, oh shit, I was in some class and I don't remember it. So I wish I had paid less attention to the facts and the details and the formulas, and I had paid more attention to the mechanisms. At least for me personally, the formulas, the facts, I lose that stuff. It just doesn't stick very well in my brain. And I felt like I had to stuff a lot of that in my brain to get good grades. But in retrospect, I wish I had just gotten whatever grades it was necessary, however bad they needed to be, and I had stuffed my brain full of the mechanisms, because I happen to remember the mechanisms better, and 10, 20 years later, it's those sort of underlying structures for how to think about computer science, how to think about electrical engineering, how to think about macroeconomics, those ahas where you understand in these very rough ways how all the pieces of systems fit together. That's what I wish I had learned more and stored better. I think there were things that I already sort of had at least half right when I was your age, but I didn't understand what about it was powerful, so I probably could have amplified it more. I've come to the conclusion that having really high audacity and really high humility, when you do them together, is a superpower. And that's very equivalent to having extremely high self-confidence and extremely low ego. If you want to try weird, crazy things that other people say, nuh-uh, that's not possible, you need to have very high self-confidence. You need to have high audacity. You need to think it's possible even if other people don't think it, and maybe I can even do it, or me and my small team can accomplish this. But then, if you have that and your ego is high, then you're just going to be smoking your own product for the rest of your life, and it's an incredibly inefficient situation. So you want the audacity to try, but then have your humility be so high, your ego be so low, that immediately they're like, yeah, I'm probably wrong. And you can intellectually, honestly assess, how is this going? So that if it's not going well, you actually pivot hard and quickly instead of doing it tepidly and being afraid of what other people think of you. So I wish I had codified that better for myself at a younger age. I think I would have been able to turn up the dial on my risk-taking and my learning as a result.
And that's perfect. I think there's a lot of aspiring technologists, entrepreneurs in the room. And so for slightly older audiences who are already working, what are some of the things that they could do or implement into their day-to-day lives to help bring in more audacity and to remind themselves of being more humble?
One of the things I think that helps is pick your time horizon. Really think about what time horizon you're optimizing over. And then you need to talk to the people around you about that. Because if you're optimizing for 20 years for your business, if you work at Google, and you think that 20 years is how you're thinking about your career, and then you're trying to think about Google over the next 20 years, you better tell your manager, because I doubt your manager's thinking about the next 20 years. And maybe your manager should be thinking about the next 20 years, but they're probably not. And that disconnect, it's not awesome, and maybe it can't be fixed, but at least you can surface that tension so that you can have a real conversation with your manager about how you're going to make those compromises. I will do this much, even though it's short-term good and long-term stupid, but I'm an exchange manager. I'm going to tell you every time we're doing something which is short-term good and long-term stupid, and if you don't like that, you just need to fire me. And, by the way, good luck getting fired. Here's an audacity thing. I challenge the people in this room to get fired from any job ever. A few of you will, but statistically, not that many people get fired. And the people in this room, your chances of ever getting fired from anything, bringing yourself to do anything that would get you fired, extremely low probability. People spend so much energy optimizing for not getting fired. You're wasting your time, or you will waste your time. You know, you think I'm joking, but those of you who haven't had a full-time job yet, you're like, oh, that's not gonna be me. That will absolutely be you. I'm telling you, we filter so hard in X, and more than half the people we get, when we're like, we will torture you if you come to X, and then you act like this, if you act like a normal person, literally torture you. More than half the people show up and they're like, okay, playing it safe, don't wanna get fired. And then we have to hunt them down and torture them. It's crazy. And you'll do it too. Please don't. You're wasting your time. The other thing is, you think people will laugh at you if you try something? You might be surprised about that too. It's less obvious than the getting fired thing, but I would also say, pick something you believe in. And when people say no, when they come up with reasons not to try, you are not entitled to your idea being right. You are not entitled because your audacity is high, because you're brave enough to fight the system. You are not entitled to any of those things. But try, then have the humility to be open that you're wrong. But if people aren't laughing at you, you're not skiing fast enough.
And now that we're talking about failure and challenges, what are some of the biggest challenges you've overcome in your career so far that you felt like were the biggest learning opportunities?
For me, probably the single biggest one, which was relatively early in my career, was I had grown up in a hyper-intellectual family that defined intelligence as the only important measure of success and self-worth. I bet you there are a few people in this room who know what I'm talking about. Turns out being smart is not all that. It's not even that useful. Honestly, sometimes it's kind of counterproductive. And I was 9 months into being a CEO for the first time. I'd never actually had a full-time job before. I had summer internships, but I'd never even had a full-time job. And I found myself as the CEO of a 20-person company. And I thought that you were anything, including CEO, by playing speed chess with everybody in parallel. That if you're my CFO, that's okay, I just need to be smarter than you and be able to do your job better than you can do it. And I need to do that with all the programmers at the same time. Obviously, this doesn't scale. It pisses everybody off, it makes them miserable, it disempowers them. And so after we got to the breaking point after 6 or 9 months, where I had to face the facts that I either had to stop being CEO, or fail at being CEO, or I had to stop thinking of intelligence as the way to cause people to bring the best out in people. And I spent a month. It was a very painful and complicated month for me because it was pretty hardwired into me that that's what talent means. That's how you define success. And I decided after a month I was more interested in winning than I was in maintaining what my parents had handed me as the definition of self-worth. So then I was sort of free-floating. I was like, oh God, I don't know how to be a CEO, and I have no idea how to even think of myself. So I redefined myself, this was at age 28, as I'm gonna have a really long time horizon. I'm gonna be really interested in learning. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. If I was wrong, I'm just gonna say, hey, I was wrong. Thank you for pointing that out. And it turns out that if you do some of these things, you actually can inspire the people around you to be a little bit more like that themselves. It's actually really freeing. You don't have to remember very much if you don't lie. You don't have to have a complicated relationship with people if you manipulate them by just telling them the truth. If you always just say, here's what I need from you, this is my motivation, you're like, oh, okay. And then I'm getting you to go over there, and then I get accused of having sort of Jedi mind tricked you into going over there, when in fact I told you exactly what I wanted. If that's Jedi mind tricking, I guess. It's not really how it plays out in Star Wars.
Perfect. And in our time together, we really talked about tackling some of the biggest and most meaningful problems in the world. We talked about how to expose yourself to the most meaningful things that you can learn about, and surrounding yourself with people who are high in audacity and high in humility. In terms of kind of optimizing for all of that in the long term, what would be some of the specific advice that you could share with our audience in terms of on a day-to-day basis? Obviously, from a productivity perspective, you're on rollerblades at X in between meetings. Is there anything specific that you could recommend people to do as they can stay in this room and put that onto their to-do list, or walk away and do that?
If I was going to get my first job, I think what I would say is, I'm the second best solution to all problems. But I'm hungry, and I'm honest, and I'm willing to work really hard. I want you to give me the crappiest, tiniest job you have. But here's the deal. Every week or two, I want you to turn up my responsibility until I break. If you'll I'll take the deal. I'll start literally sweeping the floors. If you'll turn up my responsibility every single week till I can't handle it anymore, till you have real evidence that I'm not being successful. And if that's not your style, if you're a place that's very hierarchy-oriented, that's cool, good luck with that. I don't want to have a job with you. I want to show up somewhere where I can grow into my potential, because I always want to be in a situation where I'm sort of 10 to 20% unqualified for what I'm doing, because that then stretches me and gets me to do things. And I want you, my manager, to sign up to keep me in that state of kind of uncomfortably excited. I think if you do that thing, and there's microcosms of that, even if you already have a job where you're asking to be pushed and you're taking on that extra responsibility and you have to live up to that, I think that will help drive learning faster than, you know, reading some business book or getting slightly better at your email.
That's perfect. And the last question I wanted to ask is this. Obviously at X, you don't believe in 10% solutions, but 10X solutions. And now, more so than ever before, people have the option of joining a company, starting their own thing, or not even having to have a traditional full-time job in any capacity. What would be some of the ways in which they can 10X their career and optimize for that in the long term?
I'm not sure I can prove to you that this is 10x, but I would also say a lot of people come and ask me for career advice at age 20, 21, usually right as they're leaving college. And they have usually a list of 2 or 3 things they're considering doing, and then there's the thing that they want to do. And they can articulate the things that they're considering doing, and they can tell you what the thing is that they want to do. And I say, so you're seriously considering starting life soulless? You can always become soulless later. Why wouldn't you just try and do the thing that you're passionate about? If it works out, awesome. And if it doesn't, you have soulless as a backup. Like, why would you give up at age 21 and be like, yeah, I'm just gonna make some money, I guess. I'll like have a career. Good God, kill me now. And they don't want that either. So I beg you, find something you're passionate about doing. Find people, even more importantly, find people you're passionate about doing it with. Hang out with those people and you won't be sorry about your time. But if you plan out how to have your career not be bad, you will succeed. It will not be bad, but it also won't be good. The things that take all the low notes off, take all the high notes off as well.
I don't think we could have possibly ended on a better note. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.